everybody. Welcome to this live Teacher Café chat with me, Laura, and my guest.
Matina. Hi, everyone.
Good to see you again, Matina. Welcome to this live chat on fostering positive habits. We've been talking about this topic throughout the month of March. So if you haven't already done so, check us out on socials, on our Instagram, as well as the blog space, for further input on this topic. So this topic today, fostering positive habits, we did some research for it and did some reading and watched some videos and stuff. Matina, would you like to share what you studied before our chat today?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. It's a great question, and I think I went to different sources of information to just research this really fascinating topic, because no matter where you look at it from, there are different perspectives to look at it from. It's actually really interesting, and I felt like I learned something. So I watched certain YouTube videos and found some videos on Facebook even, and also watched some listened to some short podcasts and also read a couple of articles. But the two that I really want to reference today are the two that gave me the most food for thought. And the first one was by Wendy Wood. I hope, yes, I've got her name written down here just to make sure I don't get it right. So Wendy Wood, who made me think a lot about habits. And the reason for that is that she was explaining in her video, and we'll post the link further below the video later, right? And what she was saying, that really interesting video of hers, was that a lot of the time, habits and goals are seen as something interchangeable, interlinked even. And of course, they do interact a lot. But what is different between them most of the times is that to form a habit, to form a new habit, there doesn't necessarily need to be some sort of conscious decision to do that. Not necessarily, not always. And also, she was explaining how is it even habits are really useful, and is it even necessary to have goals at all in order to get to the outcome that we're trying to get to, or is forming habits already leading us to that outcome? So I thought that was a really interesting point to raise, and that sort of, there is a disconnect there, and the literature is still ongoing and the research is still ongoing, but that really made me think. Laura, what do you think? Has that ever happened to you where you thought about, oh, is this a habit or is it a goal?
Yeah, no, when you mentioned this research, and I've just posted that in the chat as well, so people can check that out. It did make me pause, because I think there is this assumption that there is a strong connection between these two things. But just like you say, a habit can exist external to a goal. Like when we talk about habits, we're talking about repeated behaviors, and they can be quite micro behaviors versus something that's very intentional that you're trying to build. And, when I think about my habitual coffee morning routines, that's not something that's really working towards a particular conscious goal I'm thinking of. It is just a very enjoyable habit, I must say, that I like to partake in. It's like a morning ritual for me, basically.
But I think that's a great example that you mentioned, actually, because for myself, I would justify this habit, let's say, as a goal of waking up in the morning and making sure I'm productive at work, and that is why I have a coffee. But actually, that is not quite right, is it? And Wendy Wood mentioned in her video that a lot of the times we will make up our own goals to justify our habits.
Yeah.
When actually they're not our goals. So I hope that has proved as fascinating to you listeners as it did to me, because I thought it was great to start with.
I think a really good example as well to add to this is when we think about habits that we want to break, potentially undesirable habits, because they are obviously not, well, I doubt we can associate them with a goal. In fact, often it's our desire to break them and move away from them. So I think that's a really good example of where goals and habits can be disconnected very, very clearly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you also read something really interesting about habit formation what habits are and how they are formed, Laura. Is that right?
Yeah, so I've been reading a bit about this topic for some time. I think listeners may be quite familiar with like Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. Like that's quite a common piece of literature that's out there, that's been out there for some time. But recently I read Atomic Habits by James Clear, and I found that really interesting in breaking down the steps of a habit and talking about how we can really lean into forming habits and routines that we want to form, and also how we can avoid the ones and change behaviors that we're wanting to affect, which really got me to think very consciously about the steps that I follow and habits and that I have formed
Mhm.
myself, and how I can hack into those for better results for myself. So I thought that was really fascinating. Maybe we can talk about that a bit just in a moment. Have you
Yeah,
read that
absolutely.
book?
Yeah, I haven't read the whole thing yet, cover to cover,
Mhm.
because I am a person who reads books cover to cover. So I've here and there, but not cover to cover. I have to borrow it sometime.
Absolutely. So maybe that's something we can talk about now, is like those steps. And have you heard of these like steps of habits before? Because it does come up in other literature as well, like
Mm.
these sequences that kind of form a habit. Have you come across these before?
Yes, definitely. I definitely did during my research as well. I feel like I stumbled across the term cue a lot and
Yeah.
behavior and reward quite a lot, which I believe are encompassed in Claire's steps as well. But I think he breaks
Yeah.
it down a little bit differently and possibly even better to a more granular level.
Yeah, he does. I thought that was quite interesting because, like yourself, I'd seen these three steps of like cue, behavior, reward, like you say, but Clear actually breaks it down into four steps, being a cue, which is obviously a prompt that it enables the action to happen, or the need for the action, the craving, the desire for that action. So that's his second step that he's added in. That's different from the others. The response, so that could be seen as the behavior, and then the reward. So, an example of this, then, if I kind of put it in a teaching context, I'll move away from my coffee making example and go back to teaching. Um, one of the things I struggled with when I was working in schools is remembering to take the register. I always forgot.
Mm.
So I overcame this by setting up a bit of a routine and trying to make it more habitual routine within my classes. So the cue was I had a push notification on my calendar that reminded me to take the register, which was set at the start of class. Now, the
Mhm.
craving, to put it into Clear's point of view, the second step, the craving for change was I wanted to get this done so that I wasn't hurriedly trying to fit it in later in the lesson and it caused disruption to my lesson flow. And neither did I want to get in trouble with the administrative staff, who were
Mhm.
rather annoyed with me by that point for not taking the register as diligently as I should have, to be absolutely frank. The response is actually the taking the register itself. I had a very quick routine in which I just zip through the names in alphabetical order. The students were ready for that as well, so it was very quick to go through that. You could, of course, assign it to a particular student if you wanted to, but this is the way that worked for me. And the reward was that as soon as we got the register out the way, we could move on to the warmer activity. And that was something that myself and the
Mhm.
students really looked forward to. And so we were all very engaged in getting this bit of admin out of the way so we could focus on what was to come next, which was often a game. This is like the drama team I used to train. So that was, we often had really fun warmer activities to get us ready for the drama ahead.
Yeah.
So that's an example. Do you have similar examples that kind of resonate with you, thinking about those four steps?
That's a really good example that you gave. And I like how across the literature, I also saw just how powerful we are and how much control we have into forming new habits. And I was very
Mm,
happy about that because whatever we have control over, right, that means that
yeah.
we can make a change. And I think Clear, just inserting that added level of you need to be craving for change to form a habit. I think in most cases that's probably right. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I definitely have my own examples. I think what comes yeah first in my mind is when I first started teaching in Southeast Asia, and I really wanted to create a classroom management system that worked for my
Hmm.
classes. And I found Class Dojo. Have you ever used it?
No, I haven't. What is dojo?
I absolutely love Class Dojo. So it is an online platform, basically, where
Hmm.
you can input your students' names. You can have their little avatars, their information,
Oh,
and
cute.
you can give them points and incentivize them in this way. They have leaderboards. I believe now you can also add quizzes, all sorts of things. You can
Mm.
group them. It's really, really lovely. So I wanted to remind myself to start using it after every activity, to also track the changes in my students' behavior. This is something that I knew other teachers were also using, so my students were familiar with it,
Hmm.
and I wasn't seeing the effect that I wanted to get out of my other classroom management system. So I guess that was the change I was craving, to implement something that was working for everybody. So what I did was I was using quite a few Google Slides back then. So at the end of every activity, I would have a little icon that popped up as a transition to remind me to go back to Class Dojo and go through, the point system, the rewards, for any sort of good behavior that I wanted to reward to my students. So that was my cue to go back to
Mm.
it. The response. So I suppose, is this the response from other people, Laura, or would that be my response here?
I guess this is the actual action, the response to the craving. So, what's the action that you
Yeah,
took? So, this would be actually engaging and using, from the sounds of things, the platform that you wanted to use and those particular aspects of it that you wanted to utilize. So, I
I
guess see
see.
this as the behavior.
The behavior that you're
Mm.
exhibiting absolutely makes sense. So after I used it, the reward was, well, first of all, the fact that my classroom management system was working really nicely, the look on their eyes when they were getting those points, and just the fact that I was able to implement a system that was working for my students and that it was actually contributing to better academic performance. I think that that was a great reward, and of course, I continued doing it. And of course, it was over the first few weeks, it was very much a conscious effort to try to remind myself to do it, but then it became internalized. It became almost mechanical, which I think is another thing that I found during my research, that habits do tend to become automated
Hmm.
actions that our brains take or our bodies take, and that leaves a lot more room for other cognitive processes while we perform a habit.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like as we kind of refine it and it becomes a very routine thing, it does free up more cognitive space. And I think when we think about teaching in particular and how many decisions we have to make, we talked about this before, didn't we? Like it's something like over 1,000 decisions a teacher makes on
Yeah,
average in an hour lesson. Let's say there's different statistics obviously out there, but it is a ridiculous number of things. I
yes.
think the more we can lean into spaces where we can make things quite habitual and also use maybe technologies like you just gave that example to support us in automating things and to reduce
Mhm.
that cognitive load is really helpful because it means they can focus more on those relationships with your learners and between learners as well, and really noticing things that are happening on that day with your learners, being able to respond to that. It frees up that mind space for that noticing, which is so important.
It
So
is,
yeah.
and I was just going to add to that, that I think just going through the different steps and thinking back and reflecting on my own habits, the reward part of it is so important
Yeah, it is.
in just cultivating that intrinsic motivation in us. And that was something that actually one of the second source that I wanted to quote earlier. So Joe Hunter, PhD, he was talking in his video that we're going to post a link to, and he was saying how, the brain creates these new neural pathways to create that habit, and that's why it becomes almost unconscious. That's my word; it's not his word. So if I'm using it wrong, please don't quote him on it. But it becomes mechanical. It's an automated process. But he
Hmm.
was stressing just how important that reward was into the formation of these habits. And I think that's another thing that possibly makes us confuse goals and habits.
Mm-hmm. I think obviously making those rewards, it could be very small, particularly when we're thinking about building larger habits, like having those small rewards to
Mm,
really foster that is really important, and not waiting until you hit
yeah.
maybe a larger kind of, I don't want to say goal. I know we've separated the two, but like achieved a higher level before
Yeah.
you wait to reward yourself. And a reward could literally be, well, for me and my students, it was, which game do you want to do today? Like they had their favorite games and would do the favorite one. And that was always a great thing for us to lean into. So I think we could probably move on to the second point we were planning
Mm,
to talk about today. And that is like hacking into habits, because you just
yeah.
mentioned their reward being a really integral part of building up a routine and really thinking about that. The other part I think we mentioned earlier is the cue, and you can obviously increase
Mhm.
or reduce friction for a habit by thinking about your cues. So earlier I mentioned I needed to have a really obvious cue to
Yeah.
remind me to take the register. And I had that as a push notification on my calendar. So it meant that it came up on my computer as I was logging into the classroom. And it
Mhm.
also synced up with my phone as well. So I really couldn't ignore it. It was a very obvious cue. I guess I could have gone even further and put it on my lesson plan and highlighted it in pen as the first thing that I see.
Mm,
But these things are kind of like reminders. And if you're wanting to go the other way and break a habit or change a behavior by increasing friction,
mhm.
um, that helps. So, for example, if I wanted to break my coffee habit in the morning, which I don't, but if I did, I would empty my house of coffee to make it
Mhm.
really difficult. So I'd have to
Mhm.
go outside and actually go and purchase it. So that's an example of increasing friction rather than reducing it with the prior example I gave.
That is so funny you saying that, because this out of sight, out of mind is exactly what I do
Mm,
when I try to break a habit, and
yeah.
that is something that I actually mentioned in our latest Teacher Cafe Instagram live with John last Monday, when we were talking about things that help us to switch off from online teaching when we're not
Hmm.
teaching. And I was saying that when I was living in Singapore, I was living in a sort of a smaller place. We had to go online during lockdown. We were doing emergency remote teaching for a few months. And so I didn't have that much space. So I set up a little online teaching station then. And I found it quite hard to just disengage from my work
Hmm.
when I was not working, because it was right there, it was within my view.
Yeah.
And I couldn't remove it because I didn't have the space for it. So what I did was very, very simply take a big piece of cloth, it was almost like a sheet, and I covered it. And this simple act of covering it, even though it was still there, because I couldn't see the specifics of it, I couldn't see the laptop or the light or the
Yeah.
external camera, I couldn't see anything that reminded me of teaching, actually made me think less of it and maybe be able to switch off. Because what was happening was I would see it and then I would start lesson planning in my head.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
was automatic, right? So that really really helped me. And Wendy Wood quantified that really nicely in her video. She said actually that in America, for instance, when they wanted to break the bad habit of smoking, they
Hmm.
introduced a lot of obstacles, like you're saying, a lot of friction. They completely removed all cues, so removed the cigarettes from view, um, raised the taxes, made the prices steeper, and they managed to actually cut down on smoking. It was non-smokers were, I think, 15%, and it
Hmm.
went up to 50,
Oh,
which is a
wow.
massive percentage. And it is incredible what we have power over. And it does make me feel more empowered that I can actually break my bad habits.
I love the fact that you had this example of just throwing a cloth over something, just be like, that's out of sight, out of mind. It can be that simple though, can't it? I
It
completely relate to that,
can.
because I usually put my laptop away if I'm
Mhm,
working from home. And again, that out of sight, out of mind. And Jane was talking about that in her recent blog, which again, I
mhm,
can put a link to, in talking about well-being practices that work for her, and putting things away and bookending her day and making sure that things are kind of closed in a way. By putting things away, that helps her to kind of switch off from work, which I think
mhm.
a lot of teachers can relate to, that ongoing thinking that
Yeah.
often we have, because we've got marking and lesson planning and what happened in the day to think about. So that's a really good example to take. Lovely. So we've talked about increasing friction, lowering friction. We've talked about cues. We've talked about rewards. There was a few other things for us to quickly add before we wrap up today, and that is like when thinking about habits and forming new ones in particular. Claire talked about implementation intention. I think
Mm,
I've got that the right way round. Maybe it's the wrong way round. Not too sure. But being clear in what you want to do and setting time for that, and
mm,
not just saying, "Oh, I'll practice, I don't know, guitar whenever," but saying, if you're wanting to pick up a habit of playing guitar more habitually, for example,
mm,
setting some time aside for doing that, and it can be really small. It could be literally 10 minutes of practice in the morning or at the end of day to finish up your day. But I think that's really important to kind of acknowledge,
mm.
where's the space for this habit that you're wanting to form? Where does it fit in if it's something new that you're
Yeah.
wanting to foster? And where can you start? Small bite-sized steps is a really good way to set yourself up for success and to get that reward, rather than feeling like you're letting yourself down and then it becoming a source of discomfort and demotivation, which of course we want to avoid.
Absolutely. And of course, that element of repetition that we spoke about
Mm,
would also help. I don't know about you, listeners, or you, Laura, but when I try to start a new habit, I try to do it every day, more or less, or every other day, because
mhm.
otherwise I do find myself slacking a little bit. I do tend to lose interest or motivation a little bit faster if it doesn't, if it's not part of my routine, if that makes sense.
Mm. I think that's a really good point, like doing a little bit every day. And this is something that we can obviously encourage our learners to do as well. I think this is a really good topic to talk about
Mm.
with our students because language learning is so tough.
Yeah.
As a language learner myself and a teacher of languages, I can see both sides of the coin. So I think encouraging learners just to craft out a little bit of time and space, thinking about their little reward at the end, can really help them see progress and to kind of make it more automated, like you said, and more enjoyable as well. When it's difficult starting something new, but once you get over that hump,
Mm.
hopefully it becomes a bit easier.
What is it? Is it a few weeks that you have to do it to become part of your routine?
I think it depends on what it is you're trying.
I'm sure
I've
that's
done
not
things like
bad.
I've done things for a few weeks. I went through a phase once, one year where I tried a different habit every month. From
Ah,
I
okay.
did like the cold shower morning habit, which was not enjoyable. I didn't continue that. I did journaling and I did exercise. I did all sorts of different ones, and
Mhm.
some stuck and some didn't. I think it really depends.
Mhm.
I think it depends also taking some time to reflect if it's serving you as you intend or if it's not. Like the cold shower one, I don't care how good people say it is for your health. I hated it, but I tried it. That was a fun experiment. Have you ever tried anything like that? Like an experiment of where you've tried something for like a duration of time and you've just really gone for
So
it?
many, so many, so many. I do that all the time as well. But I think ultimately it's what we were saying earlier and what you just mentioned. It's the reward at the end. If it's not serving you, if it doesn't either solve a problem or
Yeah.
introduce you to a new way of thinking that you're really enjoying, if it's not serving you in any way, then it's just not going to stick, like you're saying. So
Yeah.
yeah, I tried coding, for example, which I absolutely loved.
Yeah,
I
I love
loved
that.
it. It made so much sense to me because I'm a very logical thinker. But I never use coding in my work or in my free time. So unfortunately, it didn't stick. Yeah, maybe sometime I'll pick it up again. But
Really good
yeah, we'll
for
see.
quizzes and trivia pursuit, right? I think it it's
For
really
sure.
useful. Brilliant. It's been so lovely chatting to you today about habits. Bettina, thank you so much for sharing your research. And thank you to everybody who's been watching along and commenting. I really appreciate you spending time with us. What's coming next, Bettina? What's next month's theme? Because this, of course, fits into the March's theme of well-being and practices that support us as teachers. So what can we look forward to in April?
I do love this month's topic a lot, and
Me
we're very
too.
passionate about it. And that's why we're doing this live, of course, and all of our Instagram live teacher cafes that you can find in the real section of our EF Teach Online account. But what is coming next month is also really fascinating. It is positive reinforcement in the online classroom. So it
Hmm.
does follow really nicely, I think. So, and stay tuned for our live events for next month.
That's brilliant. I'm looking forward to it, and looking forward to hearing all the great live events that we've got coming in April and obviously throughout the year. Thanks so much, Matina, and thanks everybody. I hope you enjoyed this. Let us know by clicking on the like button and telling us what you think in the comments below.
Thanks, Laura. Have a nice evening.
You too. Bye.